And Israel will bury former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon this morning at his state funeral in Jerusalem today. Sharon was remembered as a fearless general and bold political leader. Vice President Joe Biden said Sharon had an unwavering commitment to Israel's security. Sharon died Saturday after 8 years in a coma following a stroke. He was 85 years old.
World leaders gathering to pay their respects to former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon overnight, a state memorial to honor the military and political leader.
Connor Powell live at Sharon's ranch in southern Israel with what is planned today. Connor?
Well, good morning, guys. Well, security's already been beefed up across Israel, particularly down here in southern Israel where Ariel Sharon's ranch is. We're only about 5 miles or so from Israel's border with Gaza. There are already reports that there were some rockets fired earlier in the day. It appears though there was no damage. Nobody was injured. It's not even clear if the rockets landed inside Israel, but security precautions are at a heightened level here across the country. Now, just a few minutes ago, a memorial service for former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon did just wrap up. Former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon is being honored across the world. Vice President Joe Biden leading the American delegation there. Current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu who called Sharon a great leader, while Shimon Peres, the current Israeli president, called him a rare man. Now, Sharon was a controversial person here. He really leaves a mixed legacy. His decision to unilaterally disengage from Gaza in 2005 is really a controversial subject here. Many Israelis see it as an act of greatness, while other Israelis see it as an irresponsible move that really threatens Israel to this day. Now, in about 2 hours or so, Sharon's casket and the VIP delegation will move down here to his family farm. There will be a burial for a very small group of people, maybe only about 100 or so people in total will be at this burial. He will be buried here next to his second wife at his longtime family farm here in the southern part of Israel. Guys, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Connor.
When he was serving as prime minister, Sharon, who helped make Israel much of what it is today, was asked in an interview in 2003 how he'd hoped to be remembered. He said, quote, "There is one thing that I would like to do, and that's to bring security and peace to the Jewish people," end quote. Rabbi Joseph Potasnik is the executive vice president of the New York Board of Rabbis, and he is here inside the Fox Report tonight, and we're glad to have you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and for dedicating a segment to Ariel Sharon.
Absolutely. You know, it's my understanding that this loss is personal for many people in the Jewish community. Why?
Ariel Sharon taught us as Jews to be proud. You know, we often remember Holocaust remembrance. We remember being victims. And he said it's not enough. You have to be proud of your victories. And that's why on the Jewish calendar we have Holocaust Memorial Day, but we also have Israel Independence Day. And he was one of the great architects of those victories over the years.
I don't know if you caught it, but I was just quoting some of what he said in a 2003 interview. And part of that interview, too, Rabbi, he talked about there was still so much work to do for the Jewish people. What did he mean? What is there left to do?
Well, there is a peace process that hopefully will bring peace and security to the Jewish people. For too long, we have known war. Sharon fought in those wars. No soldier wants to fight in war again. So he had hoped that there would come a day when, as a result of diplomacy, after the wars, that we would have a peace partner who would sit and finally resolve the issues.
You know, in some of our coverage tonight, because we have journalists in Jerusalem, Connor Powell joined us earlier this hour, we were pointing out the counterbalance inside Israel. You know, not everybody loved Ariel Sharon. He was a very, at times, dividing political figure, and people had different points of view, but there is a legacy that most people agree that he has. What is it?
The legacy is that, firstly, no one ever receives unanimity of opinion.
Right.
Right. So, especially in the Jewish world. But he was someone who stood up for Jewish pride. He was one who saw himself as the prime minister not only of the state of Israel, but of the Jewish people. He was that representative who said, you stand up. Don't be ashamed of who you are. Don't be defensive. The world won't respect you for camouflaging your identity.
You know what I've read, too, that I find interesting is that he had this deep concern that if Israel didn't survive, if it didn't stand, then life would not be free for Jews all around the world.
We in the diaspora can hold our heads high because we have a state of Israel. We can speak freely as Jews because we know that Israel is there for us. I'm a child of survivors. I only wish there had been a state of Israel during that horrific period so my family would have survived. So Israel strengthens us, gives us that backbone that is so important.
You know, too, when you look at history and you look at the decision that he made to take the Israeli settlements out of Gaza, he was working also toward, before he went into the coma, toward doing the same thing in the West Bank. Do you see that happening down the road where you'll be able to separate two cultures, the Palestinians and the Israelis?
One can hope. The problem is that even after the separation from Gaza, we still see the attacks on the state of Israel. That change is only going to come about when Palestinians recognize they have to live with a Jewish state. It cannot be a one-way process. So I think Sharon was hopeful that by separation, that would be the beginning of that process. We have not seen that transformation.
You know, he was honest about those living in his own country, too, that it wasn't just going to be the Palestinians who would have to recognize, but Israelis would have to recognize, too. And he was a former hardliner, so he understood that perspective.
That was part of his greatness, that he was able to change a position. He said, what was cannot be. And therefore, people really, they praised him for being a pragmatist. He saw the difference in the policy, and he seized the moment. Didn't care about being politically popular. It wasn't about being reelected. It was about doing the right thing for his country. That's a leader. At
one point after his decision cost lives as defense minister, he resigned. And he then came back in his political life.
Yeah, that was an ugly story. He sued Time magazine for libel. He won the case. He just couldn't prove that there was malice there. But they had claimed that he was responsible for the death of those in the camps. The Kahan Commission, Israel, said that there was indirect responsibility and therefore he had to resign. But I think people recognize that he wasn't the one who was at fault for killing those in the camps. There were the phalangists who had done it, and yet Sharon was blamed.
And he took that blame, turned it into responsibility because he knew that there was a course down the road, from what I've read. Real quickly, how do you think he'd look upon the peace agreement process right now? I mean, Secretary of State John Kerry has been to that region 10 or 11 times to try to get a deal. What do you think Sharon would say about the process?
Well, it's hard to be prophetic, but I think he would say that peace is going to come when parties recognize that they must live in two separate states, respecting the right of the other to live in peace. We in Israel, we the Jewish people, long have been waiting for that day. We just hope the Palestinians will recognize the time has come to sign the accord.
Rabbi Potasnik, thank you very much for coming in, sharing your history with us, your perspective, and our well wishes to the Jewish community tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Harris.
Ariel Sharon was one of the greatest military commanders that the Jewish people has ever had, and that the IDF has ever had. Arik is part of that generation of founding fathers. And that uprising, that resurrection. And resurrection was based on forming a generation of Jewish commanders and fighters that will renew the heritage of fighting in the land of Israel. It is a heritage that seemed to have passed from the world in those years of the diaspora. Arik Sharon had a central role in building this heritage of might and bravery. He fought in the front of the IDF for many years, in the War of Independence, till those fateful battles of the Yom Kippur War. In the doctrine, in the fighting doctrine of the IDF, he placed central foundations and principles. First and foremost, the theory of reprisal against terrorism. He did so when he founded the 101 unit, when he led combat soldiers, heroes in fact, like Meir Har-Zion and his friends. Arik was also a manifestation and commanded and founded the theory of combat. He did so when during the paratroopers landing in the Mitle and in those battles of besiege and encircling of the Six-Day War, but more so, his ability to improvise and command was very manifest during the Yom Kippur War, especially when he led the IDF forces across the Suez Canal, and he basically besieged the Egyptian army and encircled them. Next to him, there were others too, but he brought about the successful end of the war that opened with very difficult conditions, but he brought it to its victorious end. He showed great heroism and bravery and insight in the way he led his soldiers, and he contributed greatly to his soldiers with his own bravery. As minister and as prime minister, he stood for the right, our right, to defend ourselves so that we'll be able to live here in security. That is a right that we insist upon till this very day, and it is a precondition for our existence and the existence of peace in the region.
Well, now this Fox News alert reports that rockets were fired soon after the burial ceremony for former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, and the Israeli Air Force is apparently retaliating at this time. This is world leaders, including Vice President Joe Biden, were leaving after paying their respects to the longtime Israeli leader. Connor Powell is in Jerusalem with the latest for us now. Connor?
Well, Jenna, security was tight here all day because of Ariel Sharon's funeral, but Hamas, or some militant group in Gaza, did fire rockets, several volleys apparently, both before and after that funeral service in southern Israel. But all of the foreign and Israeli dignitaries that were on hand had easily left the area, and they appear to have not been in danger. Still, the Israeli Air Force has responded and launched several attacks in Gaza in retaliation. Now, all of this is occurring as Israeli and foreign dignitaries were on hand to pay tribute to Ariel Sharon, the former vice president, or prime minister rather, who was in a coma for the last 8 years, suffering a major stroke back in 2006. Now, leading the U.S. delegation was Vice President Joe Biden, who called Sharon a friend. The former prime minister, who died at the age 85, was honored today, described as a great leader, a fighter for Israel, but he leaves a very complex history here in Israel. He was a former soldier turned politician, but Sharon was controversial. There's just simply no getting around that. Leading the unilateral disengagement from Gaza in 2005, for many Israelis, that was an act of greatness, while others saw it as an irresponsible move that threatens the security of Israel even today. Like I said, that was a controversial move then. It is a controversial move today. Now, he is both loved and hated here, and even his critics and supporters have very different reasons for liking the man, but they all agree on one thing, Jenna. He was a leader. He was somebody willing to make very tough decisions when tough decisions were needed. They paid tribute today to him. Many criticized him, said they didn't agree with a lot of his policies, but they still honored the man because of his service and sacrifice to Israel throughout his many years of service here, Jenna.
Connor Powell, live in Jerusalem. Connor, thank you.